I did my MVLA independent study project internship on learning Python and applying it to chemical engineering concepts. So a little bit of a background, my name is Simge, and I'm a fourth year chemical engineering student at UC Davis. I will be graduating in June 2021. So I wanted to give you all a little bit of a background of kind of the chemical engineering curriculum at UC Davis. So we at UC Davis, the chemical engineering students are taught math lab, and we use that for our prep and major courses. However, there has been a recent change where they switched from teaching math lab to Python. And I will go a little bit more in depth as to why they changed their curriculum. And so teaching Python is only applicable to class of 2022. So I wasn't one of the students that got to learn Python from chemical engineering professors, but that's just a no. And then I will go more in depth on how learning Python is useful for me when I look for job opportunities in just a couple of months. And so the very first programming language that I took at Davis was ECH 60, which is the engineering problem solving using MATLAB. This class is only for biochemical and chemical engineers. And it is, although it's a lower division class, it is the basis for all of my upper division classes. I still use MATLAB, and it's literally in every single class that I'm taking right now. And basically, we use MATLAB to solve chemical engineering specific problems. So a lot of data, tables, figures. So what we would actually do is go into a lab, do an experiment, get data, use MATLAB to kind of interpolate that data, kind of analyze it even more, and then come up with conclusions. So this is what happened in my reactor. This is what the product is for my chemical engineering process. And on the right-hand side, I included a lot of the topics that I learned from taking that class. And I will show what I did for Python, and there's a lot of similarities between the two. Okay, so a little more about why UC Davis Chemical Engineering Department changed the curriculum. So a lot of the chemical engineers in the industry are using some sort of a programming language, but it's not always MATLAB. As we all know, Python is kind of like widely used. And although there are other kind of like programming languages that chemical engineers use, I really wanted to kind of get an experience of what Python is, how I can kind of integrate it to my classes, and also kind of put that on my resume, obviously, because this will definitely help in the future when job kind of recruiters are looking for, like, what kind of experience do you have? Do you have an exposure to different programming languages? It's definitely a good thing to have. And that's one of the reasons why chemical engineering department switched from MATLAB to Python. Okay, so for my MVLA project, I decided to take a course at Udemy. And the course was called Python Programming Masterclass. And by taking that course, I spent 57.5 total hours learning everything about Python that they had. And I actually got a certificate for it. So this was a really nice way of kind of having a structured like Python course where I could have Googled stuff, but I thought that this class kind of explained everything in depth and gave me problems to work on. And it actually wasn't that expensive for me to purchase. So I thought it was a really good opportunity. And I do get a certificate, so that's definitely a plus. So a little more about the Udemy course that I took. As you can see on the right-hand side, it's all the topics that I've completed. And I do want to highlight some of them specifically because they really apply to what I do as a chemical engineering student and I've already used MATLAB for these topics. So conditional operators, these are if, elif, else statements. Basically, I use this a lot with my engineering classes right now. Functions, definitely a big plus, and then manipulation of data. Again, chemical engineering processes, we need data to have a result and kind of like make a conclusion out of, was this process a good, like, was this the best process that we could choose, or what is the outcome of this chemical engineering process? So this was kind of my way of kind of relating MATLAB to Python and kind of bridging the differences and the similarities together. So again, how is this useful for me? I did talk a little bit about this, but definitely building coding skills. In high school, starting in high school and throughout college, I did kind of either self-taught or like were part of summer programs where I learned how to code. And Python is just one another coding skill that I will be adding after this project. Again, exposure is way better than like not having an experience in Python programming language when applying for a job. So definitely recruiters will want to see that I have some sort of an experience with it instead of just going blindly at a job and trying to teach it myself on the way. I do also want to talk a little bit about my senior design project, which we're actually starting soon. And so a lot of what I will be doing this quarter would be kind of like what I will be doing in the industry. So I'll have kind of a problem and I will have to come up with various solutions. So actually in the next couple of slides, I will show you how I actually do this right now, this quarter in some of my classes. But basically you take this problem and you figure out each of the steps, and I can use Aspen. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of Aspen before, but it's a simulation kind of program. Basically, I can tell it to kind of have a reactor, say, okay, these are my inputs, these are my outputs, what's happening in the reactor? And I can give it initial calculations, and then it can kind of give me feedback on, okay, this is what's happening, this is your output, this is what needs to happen, basically. And so why I'm bringing this up is that although Aspen does some calculations for me, I can even add Python on top of my Aspen simulations to kind of have data sets, even more data sets, and even more analyzation. So it's definitely a good skill to have on top of like what I'm doing right now in Aspen in my senior design project. So a little bit of examples of what I was doing in MATLAB, and I will show what I did in Python as well, so just to compare it. So I'm currently in kinetics, and this was a sample of my homework assignment. So as you can see, I have for loops. I just graphed a bunch of data. From this data, I had questions about like specific chemical reactions. And so a lot of data and graphing. So that's an example. And this was actually what I just turned in a couple of weeks ago. It's a process designed for fermenting kombucha. And I used Aspen to do this. But again, I can use Python and MATLAB and Aspen to give me even more analysis of my data and of my process. And so this is actually one of my proudest work in college. It was one of my finals last year. And basically this was the first lab where I felt like I could apply it to after I graduate. So on the left-hand side, you see a distillation column and it has multiple trays. And as a chemical engineer, you have to know what's happening at each tray. So I use MATLAB to come up with these graphs, all of these lines, the horizontal and vertical, they actually represent equations. So they tell me what's happening at each of the levels in this distillation column. So I guess the reason that I'm telling all of you about MATLAB is because I can use all of that skills that I've had in MATLAB and apply it to Python. I can do the same thing in Python. I can make the graphs, I can make the functions, and these are some of the code that I worked on for this project. So in the course, after finishing a topic, there would be kind of an assignment, a little like kind of like a trick question. And this was one of the challenges that I had after finishing a topic, and it was based on functions, how to use functions so that I can tell Python, okay, I want you to do this, this, this under this function, and I want you to guess what number I'm thinking of. So this was one way of me kind of messing around with Python, trying to learn how to use functions and kind of making notes of like, okay, this is what it does, this is how it does it, and this is how I can use it in the future for my chemical engineering problems. This is another kind of code that I wrote while listening to the instructor in the Udemy course. This was simply, these are all commented out, but this was basically kind of introducing data sets to Python. So a lot of these will basically just like inputting data, trying to manipulate data, kind of all those stuff that I talked about earlier. So this was me doing it on Python. This was yet another challenge that I worked on, and it was basically just understanding how the program flows, messing around again with Python. And as you see, all of these files here will have a different challenge and a different topic. So like conditions right here, that was the if, elif kind of stuff that I worked on that I also talked about in MATLAB. So that was it, but I'm really excited that I learned Python and like I can see how similar and different it is from MATLAB and kind of like experience it in the future, hopefully my job.